the forbidden flame. The city was alive with its usual rhythm as Brian stepped off the bus, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The air was thick with the scent of roasted plantains and the faint tan of diesel fumes. Street vendors called out to passers-by, their voices blending with the honking of cars and the occasional blare of music from a nearby shop. Brian had missed this chaos, the vibrant pulse of Lagos that never seemed to sleep. Yet, as he made his way through the crowded streets, he felt a strange unease. University had changed him. He was no longer the boy who had left home months ago. He was a man now, or at least he felt like one, and with that came a new awareness of the world and of himself. The house stood at the end of a quiet street, its high gates and manicured lawn a stark contrast to the bustling city just beyond. Brian pushed open the creaking gate and stepped inside, calling out, "Hello. Anyone home?" The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy, almost oppressive. He dropped his bag in the hallway and wandered into the living room, where he found Evelyn sitting by the window, her gaze fixed on something far away. She was as glamorous as ever, her hair perfectly styled, her nails painted a deep red, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. "Evelyn," he said softly, startling her. She turned, forcing a smile. "Brian. You're back. I didn't hear you come in." He sat across from her, studying her face. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated, then sighed. "It's just quiet without your father here." David was away on another business trip, as usual. Brian nodded, understanding. He had always known his stepmother was lonely, but seeing it up close made it real in a way it hadn't been before. They talked for hours that evening, about everything and nothing. Brian found himself drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. She was witty, intelligent, and surprisingly vulnerable. By the time they said goodnight, he felt a strange tension between them, something unspoken but undeniable. The days that followed were a blur of shared moments. Brian helped Evelyn with her fashion business, offering fresh ideas and a youthful perspective. She, in turn, seemed to come alive around him, her laughter filling the house in a way it hadn't in years. One afternoon, they found themselves in her studio, surrounded by boats of fabric and half-finished designs. Evelyn was explaining her vision for a new collection, her hands moving as she spoke. Brian watched her, captivated by her passion. "You're amazing, you know that," he said suddenly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She paused, looking at him with a mixture of surprise and something else, something he couldn't quite name. "Thank you, Brian," she said softly. "That means a lot." As the days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. They spent hours talking about their dreams, their fears, their regrets. Brian learned that Evelyn had always felt like an outsider in her own home, a beautiful ornament admired but never truly seen. "David is a good man," she said one evening, her voice tinged with sadness. "But he's never really understood me. Sometimes I feel like I'm just here." Brian reached out, placing a hand on hers. "You're more than that, Evelyn. You're incredible." She looked at him, her eyes searching his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them crackled with electricity, a tension that had been building since the day he returned. One evening, as they worked late on a new collection, their hands brushed, and they both froze. The air between them crackled with electricity. Brian's heart raced as he looked into her eyes, seeing his own desire reflected back at him. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice trembling. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned closer, her breath warm against his skin. "Brian," she murmured, her voice barely audible. The kiss that followed was inevitable, a collision of longing and loneliness that neither of them could resist. It was wrong, they both knew that, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing that made sense. The world outside ceased to exist, and all that mattered was the heat of their bodies, the taste of each other's lips. When they finally pulled apart, guilt and desire warred within them. They didn't speak of it, but the tension between them grew, a secret they carried like a flame, burning brighter with every stolen glance and accidental touch. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Brian couldn't stop thinking about the kiss, about the way Evelyn had felt in his arms. He knew it was wrong, that it could destroy everything, but he couldn't help the way he felt. Evelyn, too, was struggling. She avoided his gaze, her guilt written plainly on her face. Yet, whenever they were alone, the pull between them was undeniable. One night, as they sat on the terrace under a sky full of stars, Evelyn broke the silence. "We can't keep doing this, Brian," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not right." He reached for her hand, his heart aching. "I know," he said. "But I can't help how I feel about you." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "Neither can I. But we have to stop. Before it's too late." Despite their resolve, the temptation proved too great. They began meeting in secret, stealing moments whenever they could. The risk only added to the intensity of their connection, each encounter more passionate than the last. Brian knew they were playing a dangerous game, but he couldn't bring himself to care. For the first time in his life, he felt truly alive. Evelyn, too, seemed to thrive in his presence, her sadness replaced by a radiant joy. But their happiness was fragile, built on a foundation of lies and deceit. It was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. The breaking point came one rainy afternoon. David returned home unexpectedly, his arrival announced by the sound of the front door slamming shut. Brian and Evelyn were in the studio, their bodies entwined, when they heard his voice calling out. Panic set in as they scrambled to compose themselves, but it was too late. David walked in, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene before him. For a moment, there was silence, heavy and suffocating. Then, all hell broke loose. David's anger was a force to be reckoned with, his accusations cutting through the air like a knife. Brian tried to explain, to apologize, but the damage was done. Evelyn stood silently, tears streaming down her face, as her world fell apart around her. In the days that followed, the house became a battlefield. David moved out, leaving behind a void that seemed impossible to fill. Brian and Evelyn were left to pick up the pieces, their guilt and shame a constant reminder of what they had lost. They tried to move on, to rebuild their lives, but the weight of their actions was too much to bear. Brian returned to university, throwing himself into his studies in an attempt to forget. Evelyn, meanwhile, threw herself into her work, her once glamorous life now a hollow shell of what it had been. They rarely spoke, the bond they had shared now a source of pain rather than comfort. Months passed, and life slowly began to return to some semblance of normalcy. Brian graduated from university, landing a job in a different city. Evelyn's business thrived, her designs gaining international recognition. Yet, despite their successes, they both carried the scars of their past. One day, Brian received a letter from Evelyn. In it, she apologized for everything that had happened and expressed her hope that they could one day find peace. Reading her words, Brian felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, in time, they could heal. Perhaps, in time, they could forgive themselves. The story ends with Brian and Evelyn meeting one last time, years later. They sit across from each other in a quiet cafe, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air. They talk about their lives, their regrets, and the lessons they've learned. There is no passion, no longing, just a quiet understanding. As they part ways, Brian realizes that while they can never go back, they can move forward. And sometimes, that's enough. The end. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, share this video and kindly subscribe for more interesting stories.